Okay, hi Angela. Hi James. It's good to see you. It's like a mini Biff.
Yes.
So I'm so excited that we're doing this. Uh, we're going to actually take the conversation to a next level. You know, our videos are creating a little buzz in the Biff community, and they've picked us to be the first panelists, the first people to take the conversation to a new level. And I think the reason for that is all of us are innovating in domains that are pretty entrenched, whether it's in health or whether it's education or whether it's religion. And those domains produce a lot of resistance because they're actually not simply market driven. They involve people's values and beliefs and interior lives and worldviews. And so I think that's why they put us together in our own way. So here's what I hope we'll do. We'll divide it into two parts. One is we'll have a little conversation about what really disrupts. What are we really disrupting? And what are the real challenges for us that we see? And then we have some amazing questions from the Biff community. So let's start this way. Just introduce yourself. You know, Angela, just introduce yourself and a little bit about, and then James, and then I'll do that, and then we'll get going.
So I'm Angela Maiers, and most importantly, I'm a wife and mother of two perfect teenagers, of course. And I've been an educator literally my entire existence. I was born to teach, and I feel really blessed that I figured that out a little bit later than I wanted to, but I've been in the field of education in some form, in some way for the last 25 years, and every day I'm smarter because of it. So.
Good, great. James.
My name is James Doty. I'm a neurosurgeon and at Stanford University, and I am the founder and director of the Center for Compassion, Altruism, Research, and Education. Some people could argue, though, that either being a neurosurgeon or at Stanford, the term compassion are oxymoronic. I do appreciate that fact.
So you're already innovating just in the very position.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So my interest has centered around both from personal experience, life experience, and an interest in the paradox of, if you will, why people do good, or what is the value proposition of caring and being compassionate. And now there's an ever-increasing body of scientific literature, empiric research that demonstrates the value, if you will, of being compassionate in terms of health, well-being, and longevity. And this manifests itself potentially in many domains, education being one, business, and I would suggest hopefully at some point civil discourse.
Yeah, we have a little ways to go on that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Irwin Kula, and I am a proud father of two daughters, a 25 and a 21-year-old, and married for 31 years. And I'm the president of a think tank called the Center for Learning and Leadership. And what we do is we're actually reimagining how religion can function to help people flourish as human beings. Because for many of us, religion has done quite a bit of damage. So what would it mean to take the best of the religious wisdom and practices of the variety of religions, and how do you bring them into the conversation in the global marketplace of ideas in a healthy way? So first question I want to ask, and maybe we'll start, Angela, is what do you actually feel that you're disrupting? You know, what are we actually, we're all disrupting something. Right? So how do you define what it is you're disrupting in the domain of education?
I've been thinking about that. I think I'm disrupting the heart, because we meaning teachers, educators at whatever level, teachers and leaders, got into this work because we were passionate about kids. We were passionate about learning. We were passionate about our mission, which is changing lives and changing the world. And we are in a desperate state of losing our heart. In fact, in many states, like you said, there's a perception that we've been explicitly, not overtly, asked to leave our hearts at the door. Wisdom that sort of started, jokingly, like, don't smile until Christmas. That's how you gain control over children, which is obviously ridiculous. But with these mandates and these tests and and the data that we choose to pay attention to, even though we've had neuroscience to inform our practice for decades, we chose to leave that data as not important. And we're like, well, this data is saying this and this data is saying this. So we're data obsessed and we're not using any of it because we're not quantifying what matters the most. And we need to understand both from a human perspective and now a scientific perspective that if we don't secure the heart, first and foremost, our own heart, we don't have a biologically or academic or social or human shot at the brain or their business. And education is a business.
You know, James, I want to add something to that, and then I want you to reflect on it, because Angela's talking about the metrics that we're using, the wrong metrics. And so in some ways, when she says disrupting the heart, she's saying the way in which we're measuring things is all off, and things, quotation marks, associated with the heart. And let's hold that as compassion for a second so that you can get back and reflect on that. I feel that, and I wouldn't have put it this way until I heard this, I think what I'm disrupting is actually the heart also in religion. What's happened in religion is the way we measure, do you believe in God? And then we decide whether people are religious or not. Right. As opposed to, actually, we should be measuring what belief in God, the job belief in God was supposed to get done, like become more compassionate, become more loving, feel more interconnected with other human beings. And so we actually measure the wrong things. We measure in religion affiliation. Right. Are you affiliated with the church? Are you affiliated with the synagogue? And then we find out that the fastest growing numbers of Americans in religious identification are nuns, N-O-N-E-S. Those are people who are not affiliated with anything, but they say, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious, but they can't get measured because we use the wrong metrics. Right. We use the metrics of affiliation. We use the metrics of belief, not experience, but the metric of belief. Or some behaviorism. We measure all these things that are kind of off. We measure creed and dogma. How you can actually, do you actually believe in this stuff? And we have the wrong measures, and so religion's actually not doing its job. But you, James, you're beginning to actually create the metrics that we should be using in other fields.
Yes.
Well, it's sort of fascinating you say that, because we actually have a big grant we're waiting to see gets approved, which is very specifically a compassion measurement index. And what's interesting here, what both of you have said, in some ways is the reality that at the core of all that we do, and then what defines us as human beings, is our heart. Yet, unfortunately, as we see historically, whether it's in the context of religion or what you were alluding to in terms of education, we keep adding baggage onto it, which distracts us from the reality, the fundamental core of who we are, why we are here, is our heart, to use that metaphor. And the key is, how do we get back to that core and understand actually the power of that, and how that is actually what will manifest, frankly, our survival as a species.
Absolutely.
Because we are lost right now. And it's sort of amazing that if you look historically at the foundation of essentially every religion, you find that its core is compassion. And then you look at its history, which adds the baggage of the self-interest of individuals, which continually clouds what that actual message is. And the wonderful thing about what I'm doing at this point is, in some ways, we're deconstructing this in all of these different domains to get back down to the core of what defines our humanity. And using science to do that is wonderful, because we can actually now see if, in fact, you have pure intent in terms of heart or compassion or a sense of service or caring for others, how that manifests itself in a physiological context.
Absolutely.
And
when Angela, I heard, there were so many things in your talk at BIF that were, remarkable. But one of the things that you say that over and over again is that actually the act of contributing, literally the act of contributing changes us. Now you're saying that kind of, you watch it with your kids, with the kids. But James, you're saying it, that the actual act of contributing to the society changes us internally.
That's right.
And we'll be able to see that eventually. We'll be able to begin to measure that.
It's not ideology, it's biology. So
great.
I get in religion's ideology, education's ideology, science has always informed my background is actually neuroscience. So I dropped out of med school to be a teacher. Best decision ever. But it still informs deeply everything I do. And being able to have the ability to translate deep neuroscience to actionable behaviors that are brain-based. And I don't mean just brain-based learning, like get up, move around, do some stuff, but to really help teachers and students, most importantly, make the connection that just like what you put into your mouth, what you drink, what you eat, affects how you perform, how you think, and how you feel. We don't learn through our brains. We learn through our heart. We learn through our senses. And to not acknowledge the role that they play. And these are hard metrics. I mean, you know, what better data than an MRI? So I'm showing kids MRIs. I'm showing them the inside of what is happening in their brain so that they can understand they have power to change their learning from the inside out. This is not an outside-in job. It's an inside-out requirement. And you don't go through that process until you actually give something to someone else.
That's great. What's the resistance? What are the resistances? I mean, Angela's just articulated that. I think so many of us know this on the ground. I speak in business communities. We speak in education communities. All of us speak in so many communities that are outside our quotation marks expertise, because what we're saying, so many people intuitively feel it. What are the resistances that you feel in either the neuroscience, scientific community, Stanford community regarding this kind of work?
I think there are a couple issues. One is you have to recognize that everyone has bias and self-interest. Mm-hmm. And, you know, people say all politics are local. Mm-hmm. If you were bringing data which contradicts a belief system that's very entrenched, it's going to take some time to move that. And in fact, in this conversation I was having the other day with Thich Nhat Hanh, you have to have compassionate listening. Mm-hmm. If you go into an environment and push an agenda in a very forceful way without listening to the individuals who are entrenched in that belief system and listening to them as to why they're there, and in fact, in some ways, listening to their argument about why it is necessary for them to act the way they act in the context of their environment, it's hard to change because they have to have a sincere belief that your intent is a good one and an authentic one. Getting back actually to some of the things Angela said, we as a species actually have an incredible mechanism actually to read people's facial movements, behaviors, mannerisms, body stance, and when you sit there, as Angela was saying, and you turn this into an absolute metric of, well, we're just measuring this or that, you lose the greatest tool you have to influence people. You know, and this is the sad thing here is that when you manifest your actions and your engagement with quote unquote heart again, where you're actually open authentically to listen to another person, it changes the entire dynamic in terms of whether it's education or whatever, because it makes them open to listening to perhaps a better way of doing things. But that is the challenge. There's always this incredible resistance to change because
Angela, give me a sense of the things that I think that move is, there is real resistance, entrenched resistance, but to be able to listen with compassion, it turns out our own wisdom has to be doubled down on. It's a sense we have to double down on our own teachings or our own takes to be able to accomplish the things we want. It's not that we can push it out. So that's such an interesting thing. And for you, I'm sure it's the same because, on the educational domain, there are so many stakeholders and entrenched interests.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to something James said. I just shared this in a workshop yesterday, in fact. Have you seen the videotape of it's about mirror neurons, but have you seen the videotape of the baby and the mother standing right in front of them, cooing and showing compassionate and loving in the eyes? There's no verbal language explained, just you communicate, you love somebody and you're listening to somebody with your eyes and your soul. And then she was stoic-faced. And the physical reaction from the baby within seconds, when the baby just went in absolute distress, started crying, started screaming or whatever, because the mother showed no emotion in their face. Speaking to what James is saying, this is not warm and fuzzy. This is a physical, soulful, emotional reaction. I think it is also easy to use the constraints of other people. So what you hear a lot in education, when you talk about why people are acting the way, well, one of the big reasons is it's $1 billion industry. Textbooks and testing is $1 billion industry. So their metrics are driving everything. And so having quantifiable science is the most exciting thing. This is not a luxury. This is not, and I think, you can have as many Zappos stories and as many Starbucks stories and as many economic stories, but until education sees itself as delivering a service in a competitive industry, and what we're competing for is heart share of our children, of our communities, of our teachers, and ignoring that, I don't know where that's going to hit. It's already hitting in performance, and we just keep getting more tests and more skills in the Common Core and everything else. This is our common core. Our common core in humanity is compassion.
There seems to me that there's one of the things, if I put those things together, is the resistance is to be able to listen. There really are legitimate fears that people have that produce, whether it's legitimate fears about they really are going to lose, people will lose jobs, people will lose power. It's a legitimate issue to worry that you're going to lose power. Yet alone, to reshape who you are on the inside, this is very scary stuff. And I found that I have begun to fight less with actually what in disruptive innovation theory people call the incumbents. I'm no longer fighting with the cathedrals.
Me neither.
I'm actually trying to, there's so many people who want to be supported and who want networks to think about this, who want to build alternative, quotation marks, living laboratories. And I mean it, laboratories, you've built, James, it's weird, you've built an alternative living laboratory inside one of the amazing institutions in the United States, but I don't think we would all expect that living laboratory to be built in there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
So we've all, and I mean that respectfully, but I have found that to not fight the incumbents, but actually build alternative living laboratories that will be proof on the ground.
That's right.
And at the same time, really, I love that compassionate listening. Listen very carefully to legitimate fears of the people who we scare. Turns out to be an interesting way to hold it together. Because we really are disrupting both existing markets, but we're also disrupting the way in which people feel about their lives and how to reorganize on the interior level. So this is tough stuff. Let me get to a question. We have great questions from the BIF community, and I want to get them. Well, the first one is, the first question was, it's what's surprised us recently in light of our fields?
Oh.
What surprised us?
James, I would love your answer on that.
Well,
not surprised about finding out accurate answers.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to talk about, if you will, the power of compassion, the power it has to change your brain. But the cautionary note, which I would suggest, is that we have learned through neuroscience and actual examination of contemplative practice, if you will, how to open the door to the room. And the question is, what are you going to fill the room with? And the reality is that there's potential to fill the room with a lot of bad stuff.
Yeah.
And if you frame it the right way, you can actually have your brain believe a system that is not beneficial to anyone. As an example, there was a study that was done that has shown that bullies, in fact, their reward areas in their brains actually light up.
Mm.
Now, we can argue that, these kids are suffering in their own way, and that the manifestation of the bullying behavior is their own anxiety and insecurity. But the fact of the matter is, there is also some reward from it.
Absolutely.
They actually feel better, you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, maybe a
Temporarily.
feeling better.
Yeah, no, I understand.
So that is the challenge and the scary thing. And in fact, it some ways comes back to what we're talking about, in the sense that there's pleasure and there is pleasure, or there is transient sense of feeling good, which doesn't necessarily translate into a deep sense of contentment and happiness. And those are the two things that you have to separate out and have people understand that they're not the same thing. And unfortunately, in our society, we have people who are grabbing the quick dopamine hit, if you will.
Good.
But they're not grabbing the deep, sort of maybe a lower level dopamine hit, but it is a sustained dopamine hit.
Absolutely.
And this is
Actually, what surprised you in this last year? Something surprising to you.
The capacity empathy has towards innovation. That it was two things I absolutely saw and persevered through the role empathy and compassion plays in education, in learning, the actual changing of the learner. But bringing explicit empathy and compassion into the realm of innovation, what it produced in terms of velocity, in terms of impact, in terms of courage that I've seen at scale, not just with a single individual, but with a community. And it was just a simple switching of a question that I've been asking for a long time, to get learners to get in touch with their heart. I've been asking them for 2 decades to follow their heart. Follow your heart, find your passion, find the one thing that not only gives you contentment, but fulfillment. And it's such a hard way to get human beings in that journey. And by simply switching the question, follow your heartbreak. Follow the heartbreak. What breaks your heart? What has been produced from that is not simply surprising. I don't even have a word for it. I think you said instead of amazing grace, it's the amaze of grace. Or I don't want to get what you said wrong, because it's
amaze of grace, exactly.
It's the amaze of grace, because that's what it is. When people are giving grace to themselves to serve the world, amazement and awe is what I'm surprised by.
I have a similar thing that has surprised me, having been invited into the innovation community over the last couple of years. I am absolutely blown away that in this community of innovators, and it's the full gamut of innovators in all the different domains. It can be business, service processes. It doesn't make a difference what it is.
Right.
I am blown away how there is at the underlying kind of energy of so many of the people I've met, there is this desire to repair the world, fix the world, make a contribution. And we don't have the language yet. I think we're just beginning. And that's why this IF conversation, and not only IF, but this conversation across domains is so critical, because we literally hear a different language. And now here's my second surprise, which is going to be surprising to you. I think Pope Francis, this new Pope, is a genuine surprise to me. And I think, and I'd love to, maybe the best way to say it is, he is actually in doctrine conservative.
Yeah.
And is not trying to change any doctrine, but he's trying to change hearts.
That's right.
And he's done that in so many interesting ways by holding together absolute incommensurate truths on the ground. And so he's going to canonize 2 popes who couldn't be more different.
Right.
The kind of the unbelievable liberal pope and the unbelievable conservative pope. And on the ground, he's forcing people who are deeply divided to say, I better figure out how we hold opposites together.
Right.
And you must come from, you have to have some place of compassion there to be able to hold that kind of opposites together. And it shows you that so often it isn't doctrine.
Right.
It isn't ideology. It isn't theory. It's actually practices on the ground that move people to figure out how the world can be different. And
don't you think that's the linchpin trait of a
part
leader?
of the You say that again?
Don't you think that is the single linchpin trait of a leader? A revolutionary leader is an individual who can hold opposites together. It's not an individual that can rally their base. It's not an individual that can make their base bigger than another base.
Right.
It's not an individual who wins, because that means someone loses. It's an individual who can allow people deeply divided. And that goes back to why I believe that compassion-driven innovation is the only way to scale innovation. Asking kids, asking teachers, asking the most random people on opposite ends of any spectrum, they come together, whether it is the Boston Marathon, what happened there, or whether it's the shootings in our schools. You see the best of humanity at the most horrific times, because you are serving something way bigger than yourself. You are serving the deep truth of what it means to be human, which is, how can I be essential? Because there is so much need. There is something that I not only can do, I have to do. I'm morally, biologically compelled to. And when I do it, I am a different person. Right. And that's what's happening with the
James, give us one last minute, and then we actually are going to have to go, but we hope we'll have a lot of these. But yes. James, give us something.
Well, what I was saying, and what is interesting, is that the statement you just made actually exemplifies, in many ways, this whole thing of what we're talking about. You see, when that event occurs, where you see a tragedy, what immediately happens? All the delusion baggage that you around you allows you to just discard it to be actually who you really are. Right. And when you do that, it is those interactions that stick with you your life, because at your most core level, it defines humanity again, and it makes you feel good when you do this type of an action. Just to make one other last comment in regard to what you were saying. First of all, it's incredibly important to have community. This is, from an evolutionary level, how we are connected. Now, that's a good and a bad side, because community is great, but if it's totally exclusive.
Right. And very often communities define themselves by their boundaries, and that's one of the, it's funny that you say that, and is that so much of what happens in religious communities that's partially true is their incredible sense of belonging and care for each other. That's at a much higher level very often than people who are kind of out there universal without community. But the downside is very often in those communities, they've created that kind of bond. They've created that kind of compassion, small, by dissing or denying or somebody else in some other group.
Well, and that gets back to this issue of, in some ways, our evolution and biology, which we have to fight to overcome. First of all, it's enlarging this community of inclusion, which is very hard for some people, because remember, one of the greatest holdovers of our evolution is this reptilian brain, which responds to fear. And fear gets elicited when there is the unknown, you see, or uncertainty. Right. And in the community, that can be diminished by everyone sharing. But when you start opening this up, it creates more degrees of uncertainty. Right. And it's when the hardest thing that I think to do, although there's a lot of literature now that is showing that when you can start identifying yourself with the other, in terms of either equal values or equal shared experiences, that is what breaks down this tribal instinct and allows you to have this true shared humanity. And then that creates this more of a sense of trust, a sense of purpose. And once you have that, then it allows you to truly manifest who you are. And in the context of, let's say, innovation, it then explodes. And this is the problem, is you can have this explosion occur and this incredible event occur, but you have to step into the abyss of fearlessness.
All right.
Absolutely.
So let's end it this way. First of all, I want to thank James. I know it's early for you and you're still eating your oatmeal, so I really appreciate it because you're out west there. Okay. And Angela, I know that you're like in a hotel room because you're on a tour speaking every single day to change the world. And I'm like in New York and it's a beautiful day. But I want to thank you. And I think that I want to thank the BIF community
That's what I
too.
was just going to say. Thanks, Saul and his entire team. We wouldn't be here.
Because the BIF community, I think, is an environment in which we actually can step into that fearlessness.
I agree.
So I hope that people will listen to this conversation, and I can't wait for the next 3 people who come because everybody there was amazing. And I look forward to talking with you guys again and maybe be at BIF 10. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.